All right, everybody, we are into chapter 16 with the first of 3 lectures over this material that I intend to do. You can't really tell, but this is not how I intended to do the lecture. I was hoping to be in the shot, but right now I'm having a little trouble putting this onto a screen, so you're basically looking at my computer and the slideshow that I have prepared for you, and you're just going to hear my voice in the background for this lecture. But what I intend to do is go through these notes for the next few minutes, and then I will post the first set of notes later on this evening. So what I'd like you to do is just take the time today to go through and watch this video, which will be no longer than 15 minutes, and then do some CNN Top 10. And when we come back tomorrow as a class, we'll go over a few of the things we looked at in the lecture that I gave you. And we'll also have an update on our online learning through foundations and digital foundations, the Dave Ramsey stuff I've been telling you guys about. I think we're gonna have it all set up for Thursday, and I'm gonna be able to give you some examples of stuff that we will be able to do as a class while we are remote, which is kind of what I'm really looking forward to. So before we get going with any of the Dave Ramsey stuff, we got to do a little bit on chapter 16. You have one assignment that is due so far. You will get another one on Friday that will wrap up chapter 16 in terms of homework material. And let's kind of get into it a little bit. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes here is talk about the government's role in our economy. So clearly, the United States government plays a huge role in how our economy works. We are a mixed economy. If you remember that term from last Thanksgiving, from last time we were together before Thanksgiving, we are a mixed economy. We have all types of government involvement, free enterprise, private ownership, and we're going to focus solely on what the government has in terms of a responsibility for this material. Okay. So what you're looking at is a lot of information here, and I'm going to take my time to go through it. We're going to do about 5 slides, okay? And basically, when it comes to the government, when it involves business, it's the government who makes those rules. You guys may not think the government makes rules, but there are agencies in place every year that set a budget. There are agencies in place that set rules for what the government, for what enterprises and private businesses are supposed to do. My wife works for a company that is regulated by a government agency, and they tell them what they can and cannot do in terms of what they do for providing internet service and telephone service and other things. So a few basic things on the government. First of all, it says that we spend about $2 trillion. This is a little outdated. It's much more than that. But think about the amount of money the government spends. And the way we're able to do that is through the taxes that we pay, right? I pay personal income tax, I pay property taxes, I pay sales taxes, and all of this money is generated to help governments run, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. But what they are able to do is provide jobs for people, aren't they? Think of the millions of jobs the government creates. One of the easiest examples is our military, okay? Everyone, if any of you have anyone in the military or friends or family members that have served, they are employees of the American government, and they are paid for, their salaries are paid for by taxpayers like me or you, okay? Why is the government so important? One of the biggest things we talk about is individual freedom, right? A lot of you like to have that individual freedom. And the key is, while the government plays a huge role, right, in terms of running what we do, you guys want some space, all right? I want space. I don't want the government hounding me on everything I do. So I have the freedom at the bottom of this slide, right? I get to own property. I own a house, right? I pay for it through a bank, but it's my home. I have a car. I have the ability to make profits on things if I choose to sell them. And I can also decide what I want to do, right? We've talked about this. I'll bring Zach back into the equation from last month. If he chooses to open an auto shop and he chooses to fix cars, maybe he produces things to put in those cars as well, right? That is all his choice in terms of what he wants to do. The government doesn't force you into a job. You have opportunities, options, and you are allowed to make that choice. So while the government spends a ton of money, right, taxes and whatnot, we also make sure that you have rights, which moves us into our second part. The founders of our nation want to ensure that it flourishes. So there are certain powers that the government has, okay? And these are the following. Number one, they can coin money. What does that mean? It means they make cash, right? There is a Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis that is responsible for making some money, distributing money, and collecting money, right? So coining money allows for us to have a flow of cash out there for people to use, okay? I've had kids always say, well, let's just make a ton of money and give it to everybody. But if we do that, the money will lose value. It's called inflation, which we'll get into later, okay? So there has to be a balance. I know it sounds weird, but there has to be a balance of how much money is in circulation. They collect taxes, which we just talked about. You will pay taxes. All of you will pay taxes as you get older when you get jobs and you own your own home and whatnot. They are responsible for building roads. All of those highways that you jump on, the big 2-lane, 3-lane, 4-lane highways, are built and regulated by the government and state agencies as well. They regulate commerce, which basically means stuff that goes in between the states, and they also keep an eye on what is being made, and they create rules for how corporations are organized. So they actually set standards for what the companies have to do. So think of massive companies, like let's just use Facebook. The government will step in to make sure Facebook is operating properly. And I think a lot of us might have questions about that at times, but the government does play a role, okay? Our market economy has good and bad characteristics. Let's just look at a couple advantages. We are an extremely wealthy nation. Capitalism, free to own businesses. The beauty of our country, right, is that each of you watching this video, each of you that I've seen in the last 10 weeks, right, you all have opportunities to go out there and make money, okay? You all have opportunities to choose your path, and you have to be willing for the ups and downs, right? But you also have to realize there might be some competition as well. A disadvantage, though, is sometimes the government doesn't do enough. Some people feel the government can step up and play a bigger role to help people achieve those profits and to achieve that, American dream. And because of that, sometimes we call it survival of the fittest, where like the bigger businesses swallow up the smaller businesses, right? But that does happen. And one thing we also have a problem with is if you give the government that power, sometimes they run up a massive debt. And we're going to talk a ton about debt with the Dave Ramsey material that I'm going to show you guys. So you just want to keep an eye on that as well, all right? There are 6 reasons, though, that we need the government to be involved. The first one is pretty simple. Businesses earn profits unfairly. If certain companies are cheating other companies, it is the role of our government to step in, okay? And they have done this before with certain companies that were cheating the system. There have been instances with medical companies that have have raised their prices on some drugs to make an extra profit, and the government has stepped in to shut those companies down or force them to make sure that they are charging the proper amount. They have to work on working conditions for people. Back in the day, we're actually mirroring my U.S. history kids, where we started to make these massive factories and people were working 14, 16 hours a day. That is no longer the case when it comes to where you work with your jobs. There are specific things that need to be done, safety regulations that need to take place to make sure you're okay at your job. Anything that is unsafe is no longer allowed to be given to consumers simply to make a buck. And not all Americans have had that economic security, right? A lot of us have had our ups and downs. I had a ton of ups and downs growing up. And when I first moved down here, where I had to make a living with 2 jobs at once while I'm going to school, and sometimes people feel the government needs to step in to help. And the economy can be unstable. All right. We've had a Great Depression in the 20s. We've had massive profits go soaring in our economy, going great after World War II. We've hit some lulls in the 21st century, so the government has to play a role. And we also have the environment that needs to be protected. We have tried to make profits sometimes at the expense of the environment, and the government has stepped in to try and protect, right, the only earth we have. Okay? In the end, while we have all this going on, government intervention can also bring negative effects. So here's a big example. They can affect our freedom to buy and sell and earn profits. The government can step in if they feel that you are doing this unfairly. The government can step in and set regulations that make it hard for you to achieve that economic freedom. Government has a huge price tag as well, don't they? We have a massive deficit that keeps going up. There's actually a debt clock that if you ever want to just Google on the internet, United States debt, and it's a running clock that shows you the amount of money that we spend on a second basis, second by second, and it's massive. And who in the end pays for those programs? I think you know who pays for them. We will. We do. We have to step up. And the government doesn't always solve problems for the common good. Some examples at the bottom there. We have wars that we fought that we necessarily didn't maybe have to get involved. If you think about the history of our society, we have places in our country that have been hit hard by natural disasters like hurricanes, where the government didn't necessarily step in to help the common good, and they're still struggling from those effects of things like hurricanes. And we have a welfare system that many people believe might be outdated and needs to be updated to meet the needs of people who are struggling at this time, okay? In the end, okay, we get to section 2, we've got government regulation, right? So regulation basically means where the government steps in, okay? Think of your parents, your guardians, whomever watches over you, when they intervene to help you solve a problem. How does it make you feel sometimes, right? Sometimes you might accept it, and sometimes you might say, stay out of my lane, right? Get out of my way, I'm gonna figure this out. But the government does play a role, and the key is how much of a role should the government play, right? Government intervention can cause and they can solve problems. In terms of the economy, it's really simple, okay? How much should the government step in? If you are making a massive profit and you are harming the environment, should the government step in, right? That's an example of a question that comes up all the time. We talk about economic freedom versus economic fairness, right? How much freedom should we have? How fair should we be? And in the end, it's for the promotion of the common good. Some of those individual freedoms that we're looking at are examples of balance, fair standards, and the well-being of society. What we're basically saying here is these are freedoms that we want, right? Do we want a good balance? Of course we do. We want to make sure the government doesn't step in, but what if we do need government help, right? What if we do need the government to step up and play a role? But we also want to make sure the standards are fair. It's a level playing field for everyone. And in the end, the role of our government should be for the well-being of all of us. And are people left behind? Absolutely. Are people jumping ahead? Sure. The key is for the government to step in. In the old days, back in the 1800s, there was little government regulation, and we had something called monopolies, right? And this is where we're going to end our lecture today and get into next week when we talk about some more. But monopolies are just like the game. Think of the game we've played where if you've ever played Monopoly, you are trying to wipe out your opponents, aren't you? You are trying to bankrupt them. And in the 1800s, there were some massive businesses that were allowed to do what they wanted to do at the expense of people like you and I. And we're going to get into that a lot more next time. What I need you guys to do is get your homework done, keep working on all that stuff, and then we will pick stuff up face to face tomorrow. Okay? Talk to you guys soon. Later. Bye.